Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to the Lifetime Training Podcast. And I am very excited to bring you Ms. JiJi Pollock. And she is a PhD candidate in kinesiology and health and human performance, and a science advisor for the Institute of Motion, or IOM. And her specialty in what she's going to be doing her thesis on is all around the training considerations, the programming, periodization around training females. And I am very excited to bring this information to you because you do not want to miss this stuff, because sometimes we just think it's the same, and we are equal, but we are a little bit different too. And so what do we need to know to really hone in on making sure that your training program is right for the right time of the month and the right phase in their life? So thank you so much, JiJi, for coming on board.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to talk about this and get this information out. So
absolutely. So, I want to start because you mentioned you were doing a initiative with the Women's Health Initiative and working with them or trying to work with them. Can you go into what you're doing there?
Well, right now I'm putting together a proposal for a lifestyle intervention study. So what happens with a woman when she's going through perimenopause and menopause, there's a lot of weight gain. And when weight gain happens around the midsection, around the belly fat, there's a direct correlation to metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome meaning, cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. So what can we do around the stage of a woman's life to help mitigate that? And a lot of what happens during menopause and perimenopause, estrogen levels go down. And what estrogen does, it helps your called endothelial cells. So the cells that are inside your blood vessels operate and function properly. So the operation of that goes down. So a lot of digestive issues happen. The way your body responds to glucose is a little bit different, the foods that you eat. Yeah. So that's why this is so important to stay physically active. And a lot of women in their 40s and 50s tend not to be physically active because life is busy. They got kids, they got work. And so, this is a study that I'm really excited to hopefully happen. But with COVID, let's see what happens with it.
Awesome. And the thing we want to really hone in and be specific around today is just, if you're a general population, we call it periodization, and periodization is just the different sets, reps, how you're manipulating the different variables over a course of a training session, a week, a month, a year, and so on and so forth. And we're really going to hone in on, what does that need to look like and why should it look different based on the specific times of the month? So also talking about various different populations that you've kind of segmented because different things are happening. Let's start there and go into, how do you segment the different populations before we start going into the programming for them?
Okay. So first of all, you get young girls who are maybe not going through puberty yet and they haven't gotten their menstrual cycle. So that's a little bit different because they're still developing. Then you've got the adolescents who eventually, when they get their menstrual cycle, they're still learning how to deal with the symptoms that happen with a flood of hormones. So you've got that. And then you've got the population of the 20, 30-year-olds. If they're having a natural menstrual cycle and they're normal, healthy, that's different. Oral contraception is completely different from the natural menstrual cycle. And then you've got a woman who is maybe pregnant and going through postpartum. There are different considerations for that. And then you've got a woman who's going through perimenopause and menopause. So what's going on with their physiology is different. And then post-menopause, that's completely different as well. Yeah. So that's a huge segment, and a woman's life cycle is just completely different. And training is going to be different because of the way their hormones are.
Got it. Well, when we say those things, the first thing that comes to my mind is that there's basically hormonal differences. I mean, if we really strip it down to the basics, is there's that vast and huge amounts of difference in hormones that are happening throughout all of those different phases. Would you mind giving a general overview of, what is happening during each one of those segments?
Sure. So a young girl who hasn't gotten her menstrual cycle yet is still, doesn't have that flood of estrogen that happens for developmental issues, right? And then as a young adolescent starts to get her menstrual cycle, then the flood of estrogen happens, and then the undulating cycles happen between estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. And then when a woman becomes pregnant, and going through postmenopause, the hormones are completely different. And it's also different if a woman is, gosh, I'm blanking out, is breastfeeding. So that's going to be completely different. And, you hear about women going through postpartum depression. Those hormones are just kind of trying to figure themselves back out, trying to find what's called homeostasis. Their natural, I want to say natural normal levels, meaning that they undulate the way they're supposed to.
Yep.
And then when a woman is going through perimenopause and postmenopause, estrogen levels start to decline, and they still kind of do a little bit of undulation, right? They still go a little bit up and down. And then when a woman is going through postmenopause, there is no estrogen. With that being said, also testosterone levels also go down. Yeah. Just like men in their 50s and 60s, testosterone levels, go down. So that's really what happens to a woman in the various stages of a life.
Got it. And, we have a big population of trainers. Some might know this, some might know, and we have a general population. And, specific to the estrogen and testosterones, would you just spend a little bit of time going into, what those two things are there as it relates to the training side of it, and why during certain times might you, because your estrogens are low, which ones, and how that impacts, the training, the volume, the intensity, and all of that?
Okay, so let's talk about testosterone. Men have 20 times the amount of testosterone as women, and women are often afraid to lift weights because they're afraid to bulk up. But if you think about it, they're never bulk up as huge as a man because they don't have as much testosterone. Now, testosterone is really necessary to build muscle, retain muscle, and it's also good for brain function. So if you think about the way you train, it's first a neuromuscular connection, so it helps your brain function properly to connect back to your brain. Men have 20 times more testosterone that peaks at the age of 17. And then it starts to kind of decline after the age of 35. For women, it goes up and down during certain times of the month. If they are, well, it still goes up and down during certain times of the month. Oral contraception makes it a little bit different. But during the normal menstrual cycle, it peaks in the middle of the cycle. So for instance, if you have a 28-day menstrual cycle, it'll peak around, days 13 through, 16. And that'll be different for every woman. Estrogen levels go up and down in a woman. During the natural normal menstrual cycle, it's divided into 4 kind of phases. So the first day is when you have your period. It's called, menstruation is day 1 to day 28, where there's it's your premenstrual stage. So it's divided in about 7 days, just to kind of keep it easy. So in the first 7 days, estrogen is normally lower, progesterone is normally lower. It starts to increase, so estrogen starts to increase also, and progesterone starts to increase, but estrogen increases at a more rapid rate than progesterone. And then it kind of peaks around the middle of the cycle. So again, around when testosterone peaks, estrogen also peaks. After that peaking level, it starts to decline, but progesterone starts to increase at a faster rate than estrogen. And that happens, that ratio makes the body respond differently to your training. And then the last 7 days prior to when a woman gets her period, estrogen levels are higher. And that's kind of when you want to be careful with your training, depending on how the woman responds to progesterone also.
Yeah. And again, for the bare bones out there, obviously some people know what testosterone does, and we just think it gets big or whatever the case may be, but it's a recovery issue, right? And,
yep, for sure.
And so would you mind just briefly spending a little time on what estrogen's role is with regards to recovery, and then what testosterone is, so people understand intensities and volumes need to change?
For sure. So let's talk about testosterone. Testosterone helps build muscle, helps you bigger, stronger, and faster, but also helps you recover. So it helps your muscles, promote the satellite cells and helps build your muscle. So that'll, there's a little bit of inflammation. Testosterone helps mitigate that inflammation, and then you're able to rebuild muscle. Estrogen, men have estrogen as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 1/1,000,000th of amount, but men need it for hair also and skin. So it's a huge promoter of collagen. It helps the signaling of collagen. Women have a lot more. That's why our skin is softer, but it also helps the tissues in your body. So your tendons, your ligaments, and your muscles. It helps with muscle repair. So when that estrogen levels are high and peaked, like during, days 13 to 16, that's a great way to hit your workouts hard, because you're able to recover.
You said when estrogen is high or when testosterone is high?
Well, both, because they're going to be high around a certain time, same
Okay.
time. So that's a great time to kind of hit those workout hards. Maybe, do more like high intensity during that time, because your body is able to handle that kind of stress a lot better and recover a lot better. Now, when those levels are low, now that's a time to kind of hit that. If you need to hit a hard workout, hit that hard workout, but have enough like recovery or do the right things, whether it's nutrition, whether it's massage, whether it's, hot, cold therapy, do the things that'll help promote more recovery during those times of the month.
Got it. Okay. Well, I'd love now to dive into, and we can keep it to, obviously exercise selection. We'll throw that particular thing out for right now. But when you're looking at the different segments, let's call about it prepubescent, with regards to volume and intensity and rest and frequency, would you mind be able to, give some recommendations for where those people should be staying within the ranges of sets, reps, tempo, all those kinds of things?
I'm sorry, did you say pre-adolescence?
Yeah, we'll start in the beginning and then we'll move all the way through.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, they're still developing around that time. They're still they're still learning their coordination then. So, one thing you have to keep in mind is for that age group, especially for girls, you want to make sure that they're hitting enough intensity, but you're also being mindful of growth plates. So if you're doing kind of plyometrics, there's a amount of plyometrics they can handle based on NSCA guidelines and because of their physiology, right, and bone growth. That's important, but also making sure they recover. And there's 48 to 72 hours before they do any kind of intense plyometric work around that time. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. And when you say that, rough estimate age group are you talking about right now?
I'm talking about like 10 to 13-year-olds, 10 to 12-year-olds, 11, around that age.
And so you're saying too, because a lot of people ask this question, is what is the right age at which you can start doing some form of training, strength training, resistance training? Maybe it's just body weight recommended, throughout that. So you're saying that at 10 or an 11, there's things that we can do and probably should do. And what are those things, and what do you recommend?
I mean, body weight training is great because especially for that age group, promoting that strength and muscular strength at that age, particularly for girls, because, and I'm going to go ahead of this because osteoporosis is higher in women. It occurs at a 30% faster rate than guys. If you look at the rate, but there's a age right before a woman gets her menstrual cycle that your cells in your bones are really open to kind of more growth, to promote, more growth. So that's a great time to promote strength training, because bones grow along the lines of stress, right? Yeah. You don't want to stress it out so much that you're impacting the growth plates, but like body weight training, bands are awesome for kids around that age. So those are the things I would do for kids that age.
Got it. And if you have information here too, because obviously, the incidence of ACL injuries, let's say for females is a bit higher due to Q angle and different things like that. Can you go into some of that considerations, and especially, as a younger, soccer, I always think soccer is probably one of the biggest ones for females where ACLs happen. And the reasons behind that. And again, that's a difference between male and female. I mean, males get it, but female, it's a lot more prevalent.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of things that can happen in ACL injuries. There's, of course, anatomical differences between men and women, but there's also, as a girl starts to go through her hormonal cycles, if she's training during certain times of the month where the recovery isn't great and she's doing a lot of SAQ kind of drills, so speed agility drills during that time with a lot of intense cutting maneuvers, it could be that the mechanisms in her muscles are not at the right timing. There's a delay in kind of neuromuscular coordination during certain times when estrogen levels are low. So if you're doing that then, some women say, I feel so clumsy around this time. You're like, I don't know why. But you're like, I'm fuzzy headed. And it could be because your, estrogen levels are low, and it's nothing you can do about it. But what you can do is like, well, maybe I'll just do more, sagittal based stuff around that time. But yeah, for soccer, definitely there's a lot more sports injuries, and there's a lot of things that can happen around that time. So, the lower estrogen levels, the neuromuscular coordination is lower because of lower estrogen levels. Inflammation is higher, right? So if you're doing a lot of intense kind of drills and you're not doing enough recovery things, around that time, then that could start the wear and tear at a young girl at a young age. Because I know girls in college who've had like 3 ACL replacements,
for sure,
over and over around that time.
Well, and the thing too is, there's so often we see, especially at a younger age, I see all these speed, agility, quickness camps for boys and girls at a young age. And yet it's all about the acceleration. They're not learning about how to decelerate, which is, you can't accelerate without decelerating first. So is there anything that you have with regards to, muscle imbalances for a female due to Q angle? And for those that aren't, knowledgeable out there around Q angle, obviously it's a wider hip region, which causes kind of some, I guess, instability around certain areas, more so on a female than a male. But any recommendations that you have on things that should be strengthened for a young female to help try to minimize the biomechanical differences in the body?
Gosh, strength wise, a lot of lateral drills would probably be helpful with that, because, we focus on sagittal, we focus on, the quads and the hamstrings, but a lot of lateral movements will really help strengthen that, those SAQ drills, those cutting maneuvers. What happens also is that there's a delayed activation of muscle, which causes co-contraction, sometimes. And so if you're doing SAQ drills and there's delayed activation patterns in certain muscle groups and in your quads and your hamstrings, then, you want to make sure you are training the things that support it. So doing a lot of lateral things to help that will probably help, more knee stability.
Got it. Awesome. All right. And then again, just to kind of close that one out, in regards to frequency per week and, total, sets, reps, different things like that, anything that you could suggest for that age group?
For that age group, I think kids are so overtrained now, I have to say.
And under recovered, that's the hard part too, depending on what they're eating and the sleep and, all that.
For sure. They're not sleeping. They're staying up late playing video games. They, you hate it. They're kids. And so they like their, potato chips and they like their candy.
Yeah. They don't equate yet. And that could be a whole nother, conversation for a podcast, is just what are ways that you can help teach your kids to understand that food is fuel. It's not always about tasting good.
Yeah, I know. For recovery on that age, I think if you're going to sign up your kids for tons of camps, and I'm guilty of it too, because, it's like here, my kids go from swimming practice to water polo practice to soccer practice, in one time. And they're overtrained and under recovered, and they sit in front of the TV and then they're snacking on those things that are not good promoters of, recovery. I think, down age group, and it's hard to kind of put on the brakes as a parent because you want to keep your kids busy.
Yeah.
I think it's finding the right balance of activity for the kid so that they're not just always doing, soccer, and I've trained girls who only play volleyball, and they play during the high school season, and then they play club during the rest of the year. And you think about it, you're like, well, what can you do to kind of promote more variability in what they're doing?
Got it.
Is what I would be doing. If you, it's so, I think back as my youngest one just turned 18, I think about what the things I've done for my kids, and I've definitely overtrained them and under recovered them, because as a parent, you want to keep them busy. But if you could find that right balance of activities for them. And then.
Well, and it's why a lot of college coaches now are looking at, did you just play one sport or did you play multiple? But yet in the underlings, it's all about, you only play baseball or you only play soccer, and that's the only thing you do. And it's just, you're missing the point, man. So that's great. And again, getting back to that initial question, and if you don't, that's fine. Is there a volume and frequency? How many days per week, should you be doing, higher reps, sets, how much rest, anything that you can give as a specific for that age group?
I think for that age group, they really need a lot more recovery. Do that 48 to 72 hour recovery for whatever, activity you're doing. Volume wise, they're kids. I know they can handle a lot more, but for sure you want to make sure they're not overtrained in that particular sport that they're doing. But
I'm not even saying sport. I'm saying, like, if they are, in addition to their sport, now you have them weight training or body weight training, let's call it. Should they stay under, 40, 50 sets? Should they stay at, high amounts of reps? Don't go below certain rep ranges where it starts to become maximal, things like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to maximal then, around that age. Great. For sure. I think more higher repetition range is kind of higher, because what you're trying to do is build capacity for, for growing, right? So you don't want a kid doing like a, 3, rep max or 1 rep max around that age. You really want to build more capacity for the future. And at that age, they're still learning. The coordination is still happening to them. Right. So definitely keep things simple with body weight. As far as, even with body, if you look at gymnasts, I've worked, with gymnasts, and, girls, I guess depends on your level. Girls who go to the elite level train, 30 to 40 hours per week. And then what happens is sometimes they don't get their menstrual cycle because they're overtrained, right? So,
and that's, that's this much of the population that gets to that level. And I always say that, through my years of training, I was more on the rehabilitative, corrective side of it. And I always said that dancers and gymnasts were 2 of the most messed up people later in life because of how they just push past their boundaries at a young age. So they have the stability and the mobility at a young age, but then as they get older, they start to lose the stability, and they still have the mobility. And next thing you know, that mobility is wreaking havoc on, on their body, and the aches and pains and injuries and so on and so forth.
For sure. I mean, high volume is what really happens with that. And you're right. And, I was just assisting a colleague on her study on dancers and gymnasts.
Really?
And overtraining. Yeah, actually. And, she's talking about rehab, the exercises you can do. So she's putting together this protocol. And I'm saying to her, were there any protocols for recovery? Like you could be doing the right exercises, the right, rehab exercises. But if that person is still under recovered, those muscular mechanisms to promote more, stronger bones and stronger tendons, if you're not letting that person recover, all those exercises, you might just throw them out the window. I say it,
And a lot of people don't understand that, volume is the biggest, too much volume is the biggest reason for overtraining, overreaching, and all the above, and then turns into injuries. And, one other thing, and then we'll move into the next segment, is with regards, you mentioned coordination a couple of times. And for those people that are out there, I think, there was a term called the biomotor abilities. I forget who founded that particular term. I don't know if it was Tudor Bompa, or I think it may have been. And he talks about the different, I call them fitness abilities. It makes a little bit more sense, but speed, strength, coordination, balance, agility, flexibility, and, all of those things, power. And it's funny because people don't understand. And I was guilty of it too, of not understanding the coordination issues that are happening through pre-puberty and then into puberty, where they're just, sometimes females grow a little bit quicker and their coordination is a little bit better than a younger male. And they have to understand that don't keep stressing this person if they don't have the coordination, because you're going to create injuries down the road. And focusing on all the different motor abilities as opposed to just the speed and the quickness and the agility. Because if you don't have coordination and flexibility and mobility, then you're not going to have that.
Sure.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, let's move into that second segment then, which is, what age group and what's happening there.
Okay. So at the adolescents, if you look at adolescent females, they're still learning about the hormones. It's a lot of inflammation around that age because they're not getting enough sleep. They're eating, a lot of junk food, a lot of fast foods that promote inflammation. Yep. And then they've got these hormonal cycles that are going up and down. And it's different for girls because they get cramps, menstrual cramps, and that prevents them from, your body saying, slow down. Let's not go too crazy. And fortunately I'm a female. When I've trained young girls, I'm like, got it. But here's what you're going to do. You're not going to do this SAQ drills. You're not going to do, but you're going to go for a good walk. You're going to go for a good swim. You're going to do the things that promote more anti-inflammatory substances in your body. And it's going to help with those cramps that are happening. And the girls that age, they're still learning coordination because they're growing, right? They've grown usually around that age. Once a girl gets her period, they don't grow any taller, sadly. That's pretty much tells you what your height's going to be. Yeah. So you're still learning how to maneuver those hormones and around that age.
Got it. And so then with regards to volume and intensity and different things like that, what do you recommend?
I definitely recommend, and it's a tricky situation for a trainer. I would talk to their parents and let them know, hey, I need to know where they are in a menstrual cycle so I could program properly. Now, if you're working with a team of girls, that's hard to have 20 different training cycles, but maybe have a higher training and then kind of a lower training so that you can work with both kind of age groups if they're not, both types of, where they are in our cycle. I think, when they're menstruating, there's high inflammation, coordination is low, energy levels are low. I mean, I won't go into iron status because if a woman's bleeding, her iron status usually goes down. So that helps with, energy levels and recovery also. So I would have a lower training volume, start to increase the training around, day 7 to 14. And kind of do a progressive training overload. So think about somebody who's getting back into getting in shape, maybe a little bit higher, depending on that person's training level. Get it intense around the middle of the cycle. Start to have that woman learn, or that young girl, listen to her body. And this goes for the 20 and 30-year-olds too. So we could just kind of lump some together. Start to have that, that young girl or young, woman, listen to her body around days, 21, 14 to 21, and definitely days 21 to 28 in a 28-day cycle. Start to taper down the training and start to promote more recovery type schemes. If you have to do an intense workout, do it at a relatively less intense level. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like, it's still intense, but for that person, it's intense for that time of the month.
So do you have a recommendation though? Because obviously, depending upon what type of activities, if maybe they have a triathlon or, they're performing their meet, and it's a state championship or whatever, big game, and they're in certain periods I should say times of their period.
Yeah, yeah.
What recommend, is there supplementation? Is there things that that you can give to the audience that says, hey, there's going to be times, obviously this stuff is going to happen. What
Sure.
can we do to combat that over a short period of time?
Yep. So I've had women who, like, I've taken women to triathlons and they're like, oh, triathlon day, it's going to be day 1 or day 2.
Mhm.
So what you do before is you make sure their nutrition is dialed in, less things that cause inflammatory, so, I'm a big promoter of things that are anti-inflammatory, such as like ginger and, um, a lot of hydration, a lot of, plant-based things that promote a lot of anti-inflammatory
Got it.
substances. Also, protein supplementation, and it could be plant-based protein versus, like whey protein, but, having good amounts of protein around that time real will help with your recovery and the way your muscles respond and fire over time.
Got it.
um, Getting your sleep.
So when you'd said things like reduced iron, obviously, or inflammation, do you recommend things like curcumin for inflammation, or fish oil for inflammation, or even supplementing iron? Different things like that can also help at least try to combat some of those negative effects that they have.
I think for sure, like doing the supplements, like, things that are kind of more homeopathic are
Yep.
great. I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
tell
no,
you,
for sure.
yeah. So like, yeah, things like ginger, curcumin,
Yeah.
make sure your hydration is intact.
Mhm.
Make sure you're not eating a lot of sugary foods. Make sure you're, keeping the processed foods down around that time, getting your sleep. Um, if you're of low iron status, which is awesome for the new Apple Watch, I'm not doing a plug-in,
Yeah.
but I know a lot of female athletes who have low iron status around that time of the month. If your iron levels are low, there's great iron supplements that are over the counter.
Mhm.
There's one called, and I'm going to say, like, if you take a heavy duty iron supplement, it's going to cause constipation. But
Yeah.
there are other iron supplements called slow release iron
Mhm.
that'll help, slowly release through your body.
Yep.
And it'll help you, retain your iron status around
Got
that
it.
time.
Got it.
Sure.
Okay. Awesome. Well, let's then move into, the other category, which is, maybe a big population of who trainers are working with right now, or people that are listening to the show. And that's the people that are, going through premenopause, or have gone through menopause. And would you mind just really breaking down the different weeks and what is happening, and then what needs to be, considered, and any suggestions?
Okay, so first of all, if a woman's have, usually women around that time, they could be taking oral contraception, and that's completely different. They're already getting exogenous estrogen and progesterone through that. And that's going to be completely different. Some women around this time, hormone replacement therapy is recommended when you're going before you go through menopause. So they say it's more effective if you take it, like, about 3 to 4 years prior to going through menopause, in that perimenopause stage. And that'll help your body respond to the cells and tissues respond appropriately. Now, some women are adverse to that, but there are things you can do in your training to help that. So what happens during perimenopause and menopause is your estrogen levels start to fluctuate. If you're going through menopause, your estrogen levels are really declining at a rapid rate. So you're not producing any more eggs, and then you may not be getting your period. So a good thing to do is, for sure, have your training based to how, and I hate to say it, anecdotal evidence, the way you're feeling is really important around this time. If you're feeling, I train women going through menopause and perimenopause, and some days you go, God, I feel so weak. Well, don't push that girl to, you know what I mean, to
Yeah.
do like their 5 rep maximum around that time. Maybe she's got to do a little bit high rep and
Yeah.
um, lower weight around that time. But also do the right things for that woman to promote more recovery. So, make sure she does her Epsom salt baths, make sure she is, eating the right things, doing her fish oils, doing, the things, having a lot of more protein to kind of help that recovery state if you're going to do a certain kind of workout.
So is there anything that you can arm the trainers out there with? Because, you do that a couple times where it's about a feeling, and then there's other things that are impacting feelings, whether it's outside stress or, not sleeping or just not, wanting to be there for the workout or whatever. Is there things that you can arm the trainer with that can help kind of sift through some of that to really identify, is it a menstrual thing or is it a hormonal thing versus it's a rest, recoup, and stress thing?
And it's kind of a chicken and egg scenario.
Yeah.
Right? Your estrogen levels are low, so you're going to feel weaker. And when estrogen is low, it affects a woman's sleep. So sleep and estrogen are highly linked. Lower levels of estrogen are linked to poor sleep quality. And then it's kind of like it becomes a domino effect. You're not sleeping. And then, so I think in arming the trainers is having a conversation and getting to know your client or where they are in their life. Maybe, and I hate to say it, lower levels of estrogen are also linked to depression. And higher stress levels. So the way you're responding to, the inputs from your life can really affect your workouts. And sometimes that woman just doesn't need a heavy duty workout. They need more kind of recovery based type workouts, more mobility based types of workouts, as opposed to like something really hard, like a high intensity interval training type of workout. So really getting to know your client, what's going on in their life, why they're not sleeping. And then you could figure out what the right workout is for that person during that week. Because this week is great. And then next week could be like a horrible week. But I think if you look at your trainers, you want to arm them to be able to, not have their client throw in the towel. Just because they're having a bad week doesn't mean that the next week is going to be the same, right? Yeah. So if you have your trainers learn that for women this stage, there's so much going on, have them know that, they don't have to throw in a towel, like, ditch the workout. Yeah. You could still do something for them that'll make them feel good. Like they could still feel like $1,000,000, even if they're having a bad day or a stressful day, because as long as you promote the right type of workout for that client, they're going to feel like $1,000,000. They're going to want to keep coming back to see you. Yep. If a woman is having a horrible day and you beat them down a workout and they feel worse, yep, then, chances are they're not going to want to come back, yep, so. Yep.
You remember the emotional events more so than anything else, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So to really strip it down, I what I would love to try to do here is say, okay, week of the period, they've got their period. Mm-hmm. What is it? High volume, low intensity? What are the recommendations for that particular week? And then I'd like to go then the next 4 weeks and just kind of make a general recommendation around volume and intensity within regard to each week of the month. Okay. So let's start with the week that they have their period. What should happen?
Okay. So, let me just start with every woman experiences it differently.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, like day one, there's menstrual bleeding. It's normally your body is stressed out. You're bleeding out of your body. Most women feel weak because, it depends on the bleeding. Some women bleed heavily. Some women bleed, very lightly. So the heavier the bleeding, the more stressed out they are. I would do things that promote more recovery, and more anti-inflammatory types of things. Walking, swimming. People overlook walking as a physical activity, but you can get a good walk in and good physical activity.
What about any equipment, like maybe some use of like a vibration platform, a power plate or things like that? Is that something that you think could fit into that part of the month as well?
For sure. There's a lot of studies that show that vibration therapy is a huge promoter of kind of recovery. Mm-hmm. So you could do more, maybe lower intensity weight training type with vibration therapy for a woman. Bands are awesome during that time, and bodyweight type of resistance exercise are awesome during that time also.
All right. So now let's move into week 2, post. Is that where you really want to pump up the intensity, or where does it go from there?
You start to, progressive training overload.
Yeah.
And then have a woman listen to her body. Some women start to feel really good around days, right before day 7. So you could start ramping it up if that person is feeling good. And still look at recovery strategies for sure around that time.
Well, that's a given, right? I mean, it's a given that, your workout is only as good as your recovery. So, all things said, we need to make sure we're either increasing recovery strategies or at least keeping them at a moderate place.
For sure.
So then again, moving into week 3 now, where again, we continue to ramp, and then,
for sure.
And then the week before the period that's really where you should have your highest intensities, or?
No, for sure. Your highest intensity should be around the middle of it. So it's like it's between week 2 and week 3, really, because days 14 kind of fall into that week 2, week 3. It's strange the way that, it's delineated into, the 4 phases, but it's between weeks 2 and weeks 3 that you can actually ramp up. And, for some girls that I've trained is you don't, there aren't many rest days in between. So you can do 4 days and lump sum that in during those 4 days. And then during then maybe have that one recovery day.
Okay.
For sure.
So then the final thing is, we touched on it, but I think we need to go a little bit deeper before we kind of, end and kind of figure out where we're going to go next. But at the end of the day, the menopause, now people that are in menopause, what are the big, handful of considerations that we need to be able to work on, things that we should be focusing on with that particular person, maybe different from the other groups?
Okay. So, estrogen levels are really low. So recovery takes a lot longer. A woman really needs to listen to her body during that time. And what's interesting about, we think about you're going to do 30 seconds worth of work. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, for something you want to do, like for a HISS type of thing, or it's a 1, for HIT is usually, more than a 2-to-1 ratio.
And real quick, because I know what you mean by when you say HISS, but some people might not. So just really quickly go into, what that is.
So HISS is different from HIT. So high intensity steady state means you're promoting a lot of, it's very intense for a long period of time. Whereas HIT, you undulate the rest and recovery. So you're maybe doing 30 seconds of work, and then you're doing, a minute to 2 minutes worth of rest.
Yeah. And I heard it, I've had a couple of guests on that were talking about, they call it sit, but speed, sprint interval. So really HIT and sprint are almost synonymous in this particular, I think, something that you're not going to run 100 meters full bore for more than 10, 15 seconds. Well, if you're an Olympic athlete, 10 seconds, but probably 15 to 20 seconds, let's say, and you're done. Where, what you're saying is a HISS is what is very popular right now with regards to classes, like most, classes out there, your F45s or your Orange Theories, or with us, it's GTX. But things like that, where you're maintaining a relatively high intensity over time because you can, versus sprint or HIT in your case, is you are all out and you're going to need that rest before you lock up.
For sure.
Okay.
So for a woman that, in postmenopause or menopause, you really want to promote a lot of recovery. So your rest to work scheme is going to be different for a woman that age, because she might need a lot more rest to recover in those types of sessions, in your HIT type sessions, the HIT sprint, and also in your HISS types, so that's something to keep in mind for a woman who's going through menopause.
So their frequency might need to be a little less, is what you're saying, per week. So instead of maybe working out 4 or 5 days a week, might drop to 3 days a week.
For sure.
And then doing other activities at different intensities that can help recover.
Right? Maybe low intensity, steady state type stuff.
That's awesome. Well, this is great. Anything else that we didn't hit on, that you feel is pertinent to the conversation?
I think it's really just getting to know your clients is what I really want to promote, your female clients in general. And that's a sticky situation, right? A male to female client. But if you have a good set of open communication with your female client, if you're a male, then I think that's going to really take you to a different level and responsibly training for that woman's just health and, you know, longevity, because you want them to stay with you for a long time.
I think it's easy to, you know, again, maybe not easy, but having a consistent daily readiness questionnaire or something that becomes part as a trainer, part of your, what you do, whether it's male or female, obviously could change, questions could change slightly with female, and letting them know, setting the expectation, hey, before every session, I'm going to go through these quick questions to be able to make sure that the workout that we have for you is right for you today. Because I can adjust on the fly. I know IOM is fantastic, some of the best education out there. Is there something that you guys have regards to a daily readiness or a movement readiness that you guys use, or is that something that's not there yet?
No, we have something, a movement readiness questionnaire that we do have in our education curriculum. So, you know, we have our level 1 advanced health and human performance type of course. So that gets you ready to learning how to program. And then we have the advanced health and human performance level 2 that helps you with recovery schemes. And, you know, it teaches you the 4Q of metabolic conditioning. And then we'll have our level 3, which will take you into special populations. So thinking about how to train for a woman, think about how to train for a person with, you know, type 2 diabetes, because that's completely different in their muscular mechanisms. Teach you about a person with osteoarthritis. What's the best way to, you know, to work with a person like that?
Well, that's great. I can't thank you enough for being on and sharing the information. And I know you've got some big things you're working on between your PhD and some course content curriculum. And, you know, please, when that stuff launches or when it's out there, we'll add it into the show and maybe have you back on. So I thank you a ton. Tell Michelle I said hello. And if those that out there, if you don't know what IOM is, please go check it out. It's some of the best education that's out there right now. Really could change your game and you know, change your client's experience. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. All right.
Have a good day.
Okay.